So let's go ahead and begin. So this is a program entitled Your Guide to Contactless Payments. And I pitched this idea a few months ago at the library about doing a program like this. I was sure that there were probably people in the community who were curious about contactless payments, but maybe hadn't tried it yet, possibly because they didn't feel it was necessarily the safest thing to do, or maybe it's just because there are no real instructions when you go to the store. How do you pay contactlessly? Nobody tells you. You're just kind of expected to know. So in this program, I'll talk about how it works in the real world, and talk about its relative safety. I'll also talk about how payments in the US, the forms of payment that we use, have shifted over time, and what effect the pandemic has had on all of this. When it's all said and done, I think you'll be able to make an informed choice as to whether contactless payments are right for you. So the first slide. So let's talk about how we got there. Essentially, over the years, we've seen this transformation in the kinds of payments that have been embraced by people in our country. First up, we had cash. There's something sort of special about paying cash for something as its actual currency and not simply a representation of it. There are some downsides, though, to cash. You can feel vulnerable to theft if you're carrying a lot of it on you. It can get dirty with use. And if you lose it or have it stolen, you're generally without much of a recourse on what to do. Next up are paper checks. I remember getting my first checkbook back in the day when I was around 18, and going through the process of ordering the checks at the bank seemed like some sort of a rite of passage. And I'm sure many of you experienced the same thing. Checks seemed like a better option than cash in many ways. For example, you could easily write a check for a large ticket item, whereas carrying that amount of cash on your person has risks, as I mentioned before. But a real revolution happened with credit cards. They offered much more convenient transactions for users, as well as free credit for a month or so before purchases began to accrue interest and fees. They took up even less space than a checkbook, making it easy to have your credit card with you at all times. By the 1980s, credit cards with a magnetic stripe on the back became sort of the norm. This, even though it wasn't really popularized till the 80s, was first developed by IBM way back in the 1960s. And this magnetic stripe allowed merchants to capture all the information that they needed in a brief action, simply swiping the card's magnetic stripe through a special reader. For this discussion, it's important to note that the information on the magnetic stripe on your card is static. It includes your credit card number, your verification code, and your expiration date. And with the proper equipment, nefarious people can extract the data from that magnetic stripe and use it to make online purchases or even make a clone of your card. This seems like a major security loophole. Now, I will note that, generally speaking, credit cards protect us, the consumers, from fraudulent charges if they're reported quickly enough. The same can't necessarily be said for things like debit cards, another form of payment which kind of became popular during this rough time period. I'm sure all of you can remember when credit cards with chips began to appear on the scene. They first were here in any sort of numbers by 2010, but they really took off in 2015 when credit card companies shifted the liability for fraudulent purchases from the credit card company to merchants. And that happened if they chose to swipe a card that had a chip on it. So they were on the hook for any fraudulent purchases any of that money. So many small merchants had been avoiding purchasing the terminals that would be able to read the chip cards until this point because they were kind of expensive. But having to absorb the cost of that fraud sort of changed their minds. So they bought and they installed that new equipment with the chip readers. And since then, of course, we've all had to adapt to the idea of inserting your chip card into a machine and waiting until the transaction is complete. In the early days, this could take several seconds, which felt kind of like an eternity compared to a magnetic stripe swipe. And finally, we get to contactless payment methods. And what is that exactly? So a contactless payment method is one that essentially is done by tapping a credit card or a smartphone or something that has an NFC chip in it, which stands for near field communication. And that NFC chip transmits data to the merchant's terminal, sort of telling them who to bill and how much and all that sort of thing. So MasterCard, Visa, and American Express began offering these kinds of cards as far back as 2008, if you can believe that. But merchant acceptance was not widespread at all. A few years later, in 2011, Android phones began to offer a mobile wallet, which could be used to make those contactless purchases. By 2014, Apple Pay was introduced, Apple's version of what Android was doing, offering the same sort of functionality to iPhones. And in 2015, Apple even enabled this on their smartwatches as a means of paying contactlessly. As these mobile wallets began to be used on smartphones and smartwatches, vendors kind of took note because people liked them. More places began to install the necessary equipment and to accept these contactless payment methods. And just talking about the mobile wallet idea, using your smartphone or smartwatch to pay for something. In 2020, 92% of the payments that were performed from a mobile wallet were used used Apple Pay as their form of payment. 5% of those were done using Google Pay, and 3% were done with Samsung Pay. So Apple Pay came onto the scene a little bit late, but has taken sort of a commanding lead in the number of transactions that are performed using mobile wallets as a form of payment. And don't worry, we'll be talking more about the nuts and bolts of contactless payment cards and mobile digital wallets in a few minutes. So let's take just a brief moment to consider COVID. The entire world really was turned upside down in 2020 when the COVID-19 virus emerged. This also affected the way we pay for things. The idea of touching a shared payment terminal began to seem unsafe to consumers because the means of transmission of the virus wasn't really well understood in the early days. So anything we could do to avoid touching a public or shared surface, we did. And I include myself in that. There were reports in labs that the virus could survive on hard surfaces for hours or even days. So people began to feel that many everyday activities like getting the mail or touching a doorknob or even an elevator button seemed a little risky. At the same time, people were willing to try new things during this period if it seemed like they might help reduce the likelihood of virus transmission. Curbside pickup at stores is one thing that people began to try, and they really liked it, and contactless payment is another. So this willingness for consumers to try some things that they haven't before really helped contactless payments reach like a more mainstream audience. According to Visa, to put some numbers on these, tap-to-pay transactions grew more than 30% over the previous year. And importantly, 47% of people surveyed said that they wouldn't shop at a store that does not offer contactless payment in some way. So this seems to imply to me anyway that once people try contactless payments, they really like it and they want to, or they come to expect it at their favorite merchants. And it really does seem to improve the payment experience to make it more convenient and easy. So how does this actually work? We already talked about that. How does this work in the real world? So we've been talking about it kind of abstractly thus far, but first of all, if you're trying to use it in the real world, you need to figure out where it's accepted. So does the merchant in question accept contactless payments? So to do this, you need to be on the lookout for a special little symbol on the payment terminal. And to me, it looks like a sideways Wi-Fi status that you might see on your smartphone or up in the menu bar of your computer. So if you can look at the vending machine that I have here, in the blue circled area, that little sideways Wi-Fi looking thing is the contactless payment card icon or NFC icon. So if the place that you're trying to have pay or to make payment to has something that has that on it, they'll accept your payment if it's sideways. So let's say I wanted to make a purchase at this vending machine. I was thirsty. So how would I do it? Well, basically, if you have a credit card that has a contactless payment capability, you simply hold the card over that symbol for a second or two, and the payment will be processed. The device will give you some sort of notification, like a flashing light or a beep or a message on the screen that says that your payment went through. If you're using a phone with a mobile wallet to pay, you may have an extra step in which you have to authenticate to show that it's really you trying to make that payment. You might do that with your thumbprint, your face, or a PIN that you type in on your phone. It's super fast and convenient, and the convenience is why I started using contactless payment a few years ago. So what's actually going on behind the scenes? Well, as I've mentioned before, it relies on this wireless protocol called NFC, or near field communications, to transfer that payment information. It's really quite similar to the technology that they use in RFID passports and passport cards. So generally speaking, you need to be pretty close to the payment terminal, like 1 or 2 inches away from it with your card in order for it to work. Once you do that, a sophisticated encryption algorithm converts your payment information into a unique string of characters. And this process is called tokenization. And that means that your payment information is really of little use to anybody but the financial institution authorizing the payment. Your credit card number is not revealed to the merchant. So is it safe from fraud? This is the biggest question I think that a lot of us have about this whole process and why people have been cautious in adopting it. I know I was concerned about it at first. So I guess one big question is, can someone use some kind of a credit card scanner to harvest your information without your knowledge? Can they do that sort of from a distance? So as we talked about, your card really needs to be quite close to the payment terminal in order to work, maybe an inch or two away. So would a credit card scanner that a thief has have to be that close in order to work? The answer is probably not. Under optimal conditions, thieves may actually be able to pull your information from longer distances away, probably in the neighborhood of up to 3 feet. In order to do this, though, they have to have a very sensitive scanning device that has a big antenna, so that they can grab that information that's normally transmitted just a little bit. They need to grab that from a distance, so the antenna is larger. And that means that it's going to be fairly obvious if someone is using this device out in the open, they'd be hanging onto this big gadget where they're trying to scan things. So they're probably going to put this in a bag or a backpack or something like that. Still, the idea that people can even do this in the first place is disturbing. But remember, unlike the static information that's in your magnetic stripe card, the information on your contactless card is tokenized, so that the chances of fraud are actually greatly reduced. And even better, this tokenization information is only valid for a single transaction. And according to a Consumer Reports article last year, there have been exactly 0 documented cases of RFID credit card fraud. Now, that doesn't mean that there are some cases that weren't documented, but at least it gives us some peace of mind that it's not a widespread activity, and it's actually a fairly sophisticated thing for a thief to have to do in order to get your information. So I kind of look at credit card theft or credit card fraud a little bit like bike theft. A determined and sophisticated thief may be able to cut through your hardened steel, tamper-proof bike lock's chain, but they're much more likely to look for an easier target, a bike with a lousy lock or no lock at all. And the real truth is that it's much easier for thieves to use credit card information that they've obtained through online commerce data breaches, for example. Reportedly, lists of credit card information are regularly sold in the shadowy reaches of the internet. So people that buy this information will often use it to make a purchase online. And this type of fraud is called card not present fraud, and its use is increasing, while card present fraud, such as where a thief would use a physical card, like a clone of your card or a stolen card, is actually going down. And to cover security a little more, you may not realize it, but you probably already have a defense system in place to protect you against this theoretical card scanner, or you may. And how can that be true? Well, it turns out if you have multiple NFC cards in your wallet, scanners have a difficult time kind of differentiating one stream of numbers from another. It's kind of all jumbled together. So ultimately, when that happens, none of the cards in your wallet can be read if you have multiple cards. So if you actually went to the store to buy a dining room table and you had a stack of 2 NFC cards and you held it over the payment terminal to pay, it wouldn't go through. It wouldn't understand what to do with this information. So I think that's a real protective sort of thing that's built into these NFC cards if you have multiple ones anyway. So I have a couple of NFC cards in my wallet right now, so I feel a little reassured by this. And over time, as NFC technology is adopted by more and more people, you're more likely to have multiple cards in your wallet, and that will provide greater protection. But people will still ask, should I buy a special RFID blocking wallet? You might consider it, frankly speaking, as those products do work. Many experts feel it's unnecessary for the reasons that I've mentioned before. I think there's a lot of money to be made when these companies are kind of exploiting people's fears, and a lot of RFID companies are taking advantage of this by selling these kinds of products. But if it gives you peace of mind to know that your signal is not traveling beyond the wallet, it really can't hurt, especially if you're not paying too much more than a standard wallet costs. Another option is you could use an RFID blocking sleeve. These little thin sleeves you can insert your cards in, and they work just fine. You can get a multi-pack for $10 on Amazon.com, and I'm sure they sell them at Best Buy and Micro Center and all that sort of thing. So that would be a really quick way, an easy way to get some peace of mind and reassurance. So are contactless payments safe? After researching this topic, my impression is yes, they're pretty safe. Certainly more so than handing your card over to the server at a restaurant for processing, something that nearly all of us have done multiple times in our lives. So what are some of the contactless payment options? Well, we have contactless credit cards, like I mentioned. We have mobile wallet apps. We have PayPal, and we have peer-to-peer payment. So first up is contactless credit cards. So how can you tell if your credit card is even able to pay contactlessly? Well, it's very simple. You look at both the front and the back of your card, and if you see that little NFC symbol on either side of your card, it's ready to go. You can see it here on this yellow demo credit card up in the corner. If you have one of those on your card, you're set. You don't have to call the credit card company and say, please turn this on for me. It's already ready to go. And next up are mobile wallet apps, which I've also alluded to. And these are produced by Apple, Google, and Samsung. Those are the major players anyway. And in some cases, as I've mentioned, these can be used on smartwatches as well, not just smartphones. And in general terms, Apple devices use Apple Pay. Android devices should be able to use Google Pay. And Samsung devices actually get a choice of Samsung Pay and or Google Pay. And mobile wallets really are my favorite form of contactless payment because I nearly always have my telephone with me. It's quite convenient to use. And essentially, these apps talk to the NFC chip in your phone, and then it kind of behaves as if it were a contactless credit card when purchasing something. And what I like a lot about this is you can turn an ordinary non-contactless credit card into a contactless one simply by adding it into your phone's digital wallet. For example, my main card doesn't have that little icon on it, so I can't use it for NFC, but I've added it to my Apple Wallet and it becomes a contactless credit card sort of by being on my phone. So how does that work really when you're at the store and wanting to pay for something? So I simply double click the home button on my phone. It's an older iPhone, an iPhone 8, and I hold that near the payment terminal. And the phone sends that information from the NFC chip to the terminal, and my phone vibrates when the transaction is complete. I also see kind of a done check mark on the screen of my phone. On newer versions of the phone, rather than kind of double clicking and using your thumbprint, you may need to authenticate with Face ID, and that just glancing at the phone's camera is enough to prove that you're you. And this process is very similar for Google Pay and Samsung Pay. It's all very quick and convenient. I want to mention there's something kind of interesting about Samsung, or there was something unique about how they could operate. A number of Samsung phones in recent years had something called MST, or magnetic secure technology, and this was embedded into their phones. And of course, this relates to that magnetic stripe that we have on the back of our credit cards. So Samsung phones that had this support were actually able to kind of communicate with the card reader, the swipe thing on the payment terminal. So they can simply kind of hold their Samsung phone near any terminal that has one of those swipe readers, and it would wirelessly send that information as if they had swiped the card. It's crazy, and it's very impressive. Of course, the bad news is Samsung is discontinuing this in the newer phones because magnetic stripe readers at the terminals for payment are just not there as much anymore because chips are pretty much required. It was very impressive technology while it lasted, though. So if you want to get started using a mobile wallet on a smartphone, how do you do that? Well, the first thing you need to know is whether your phone even supports NFC. The very first phone that offered this kind of thing wasn't a smartphone at all, actually. It was a flip phone made by Nokia all the way back in 2006. And Android phones began offering those NFC chips in their phones in 2010, and all iPhones since the iPhone 6, which was released in 2014, had this NFC technology built in. So generally speaking, the newer your phone is, and the more high it sits in the product lineup, the more likely it is to have NFC. It's fairly commonplace nowadays, but it's not universal. So if you have a budget smartphone from a couple years ago, it most likely will not have NFC, but a pricey phone that you purchased last year probably does. But how can you tell if your specific phone has NFC? You know, I found that the quickest way to find out is simply to Google it. So you'll do a search like, does the Samsung Galaxy A6 have NFC in Google? And you'll quickly find out that yes, it does. You can do this for any phone model, and you'll probably get multiple results in your Google search that tell you what the specifications of the phone are and whether it offers that NFC. So look for NFC, and hopefully it has it, your phone that is. It may be turned off by default, so you do have to enable it. On iPhones that have the NFC chip since, what was it, 2014, you don't have to enable it. It's already turned on. But for Samsung and Android phones, I've included a couple of links, or a link to check to see. It'll show you where to look in your settings to find out how to turn on NFC if it's not already. And I've also given a link here on how to set up your wallet in Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Samsung Pay. You'll add your card information into the application, and it'll authenticate it with your financial institution to make sure it's legit. So I have links for Apple, Google, and Samsung here on the page. So I would definitely check that out. The process is similar for each of the three, slightly different, but it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't seem to be that confusing. So that's mobile wallets. I'd like to move on and talk about PayPal for a moment, if I could. I really didn't think I could do any sort of a program dealing with mobile payments and not mention PayPal. As many of you are no doubt aware, PayPal is a very popular means of sending payments online. Its initial popularity stemmed from its use in sending and receiving payments on eBay, and gone were the days of having to send or receive a cashier's check for an item. You could simply get the money or send the money via PayPal. The company launched in 1999, and it quickly became so popular that it was actually acquired by eBay in 2002. I got a PayPal account way back in the year 2000, I remember, so I could easily buy and sell things on eBay. I think I should mention that PayPal, at least most PayPal transactions with phones, are not made using NFC technology. Instead, they use something called a QR code. You can see an example of a QR code on the screen here. It's very similar in some ways to those lined barcodes that you have at the grocery store on the products that you buy. The difference is that a QR code, it can store a lot more information than simply some sort of a product number. It could contain a long website address. It could contain your contact details or any variety of information. So PayPal uses this QR code to contain information about a PayPal account. So a vendor might have a PayPal QR code like this at their business at the point of sale to enable patrons to scan that using the PayPal app that they've already installed on their phone. That lets them make payment to the merchant using PayPal. And they're not, it's not strictly speaking a contactless form of payment because it doesn't have that NFC chip, but it's a mobile payment, and it's close enough that I thought we should talk about it. If you don't have a PayPal account, it's really quite simple to set one up. My general impression in using it over the years is that it's fairly secure as well. For those of you who don't have a phone supporting NFC communication, PayPal might be a way you could experience some of the benefits of it, assuming the vendors take PayPal. Unlike using credit cards or credit cards via a mobile wallet, though, you don't get that same level of protection from unauthorized transactions. Next up, I'd like to talk just a moment about peer-to-peer payment. This has sort of become a real thing recently. It's one of those technologies like PayPal that doesn't strictly fall into that contactless payment category, but it's similar. It used to be rather difficult to send money to another person. You might have to go to the bank or a Western Union and set up a wire transfer. Of course, you could send them a check, but that might take a few days to arrive in the mail. You could mail cash, but that's a very risky business. PayPal did a lot to improve peer-to-peer payments, but things are even easier nowadays. So today I'll talk about 3 apps that are designed to make it really simple to send money to your friends and family. They're Zelle, Cash App, and Venmo. And honestly, I would only recommend that you use these to send money to people you know well. PayPal is a little bit better for transactions with distant parties to whom you'll make like a one-off payment. Zelle is the first one I'll talk about. So Zelle is an app that has a very tight relationship with your bank. Only certain banks participate in using Zelle and offering Zelle, but if they do, it's very tightly attached to your account. So when you send money with Zelle, it's deducted directly from your bank account and sent immediately. You never have a balance on your Zelle account, as the money is just moving from place to place. It doesn't hang out in Zelle world. The other 2 apps are different. Cash App and Venmo act as sort of an intermediary in payments to and from banks. So this allows them, or allows you to carry a balance in your Cash App account or your Venmo account. And there are some important differences between the 2 of them. Excuse me for just a moment. So Cash App is owned by Square, and that's a company that a lot of small businesses use to take online payments. If you're shopping at a flea market and the vendor accepts credit cards, chances are they're using Square to process the payment. Cash App distinguishes itself by offering a broad variety of services in addition to peer-to-peer payment. So surprisingly, you can actually invest in stocks and even purchase cryptocurrency with your Cash App account balance. You can even set up direct deposit to your Cash App account and kind of treat it like, I don't know, some hybrid between a bank account and PayPal. They also talk about this feature called Cash Boost, and it works with merchants to offer special discounts to people that pay with Cash App. So places like McDonald's, Whole Foods, 7-Eleven, Wendy's, and Domino's Pizza offer 10% off for people that pay with Cash App. The other competitor to Cash App and to Zelle to some degree is Venmo, which gets a lot of press. It's a very popular one. It's actually owned by PayPal now, the company we talked about a moment ago. So unlike Cash App, Venmo has this interesting social component. You can set up your account so that a group of your friends, which also they also have Venmo installed, you're all kind of connected in a feed, a little bit like Twitter or Instagram. So whenever you send money to one of your friends in your circle, everybody sees a message that says, Mike sent money to Kylie. And I send a message saying, for last night's Italian food. And I put a little spaghetti emoji in it. So it's this kind of online community in a way that's around the transfer of money to people. So for some of us, this sharing of financial information seems like a very strange concept, but it really comes quite naturally to millennials and members of Generation Z. I should note that if you do set this up, your transactions are public by default. So make sure to review your privacy settings if you're setting up Venmo for the first time. And like Cash App, you can also have your direct deposits go directly into your Venmo account. One thing to note about these, Venmo and Cash App, your balances don't have FDIC insurance. So if the companies go under, you probably will lose any balance you may have in your account. So it's a little risky as compared to a checking account or a savings account. The cool thing about them is, though, that they are free for basic services like sending money. Even receiving money is free, though Venmo and Cash App charge extra for instant processing, as standard withdrawals can take a few days to process. Zelle, by contrast, is much quicker in ordinary operation. And finally, make sure that when you're using a peer-to-peer payment service like this, you know the person well to whom you're sending the payment. There have been numerous reports of fraud in the news in this world, this peer-to-peer payment world. You might get a message from a friend. It's got their little face on there. It looks like their username is right, and they're asking you, I'm stranded at a gas station. Can you please Venmo me $30 so I can buy gas? Which, if you're in trouble and you need help, you would want someone to help you. So people are inclined to want to help out, so they send the money. And in fact, that was not really your friend. If you look at their username, it's probably off by a character or two, and they probably, through social media, found a photo of your friend and kind of are trying to trick you. So you have to be really careful about that kind of thing. That's why I say first of all, don't use it with strangers if you can help it. And if a friend is asking you to send them money via Venmo or Zelle or Cash App, call them up or text them or something, email them, ask them if that's really them that's asking for money because you suspect fraud, and they'll let you know whether it's legit or not. In the final section of this discussion, I'd like to talk about the kinds of scenarios that you might use contactless payment. So a number of businesses, a growing number, have started offering this kind of payment service. As we've talked about before, as consumers learn about this, they become interested in it, and vendors see that and install the technology needed. So I found, while I was researching this program, a MasterCard webpage, which I have the link to on this slide, which allows you to see which businesses offer contactless MasterCard payment. And really, if MasterCard is offered, chances are they're going to offer payment for Visa and probably your smartphone and that sort of thing. Because, if you accept one, you probably accept them all. So this could be kind of a proxy for how popular contactless payment is in a given area. And it shows it on a map, which I really like. So I've sort of typed in Hinsdale into the MasterCard website, and you can see on the screen all the places that offer contactless payment in the downtown area. And there are quite a few, as you can see. And undoubtedly in a year or two, there'll be even more of these pins on the map. So where specifically can you use it? Well, first of all, you might use it in a retail store. I think this is probably one of the most likely places that you'll be able to use contactless payment, from grocery stores to pharmacies to large retailers. Contactless payment is becoming more and more popular in these kinds of venues. For example, I always pay contactlessly at places like Walgreens or Meijer. It's just very convenient. The next place you might see it are at restaurants and coffee shops. McDonald's, Jimmy John's, Panera, and many other national chains offer this form of payment. I should note that in addition to standard contactless payment, some restaurants offer contactless payment via their rewards program. The best example of this is Starbucks. They have this rewards program, which I'm sure some of you participate in, that you kind of load your balance onto a Starbucks account or card. And then when you go to Starbucks to pay for something, you show them a little QR code on your Starbucks app. They scan it and they deduct that amount from your account. So this is a form of contactless payment in a way. And Starbucks is incredibly popular. Their use of this app it's one of the most popular ways of paying contactlessly that there is. For the merchant, like Starbucks, it's a really good deal because they don't have to share money with the credit card company for each transaction. Starbucks also accepts normal contactless payment, not just the rewards kind, but both. So you might check that out if you haven't done it already. The next thing you might want to do is pay for gas at a gas station. Increasingly, you'll find that little NFC symbol on gas pumps, and that can be a real boon and is certainly more efficient than using the keypad at the pump. You can use any standard form of contactless payment, like a credit card or a mobile wallet. Like with Starbucks, in the previous example, a lot of gas companies are starting these or using these reward programs that they offer through their apps that you download, on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. You download the BP app, and then whenever you go to BP and fill up, you get rewards. Well, they're tying in contactless payment of a sort into their applications like Starbucks has. So in this case, you would add a credit card to your ExxonMobil rewards program, and then it's kind of stored in the application. The cool thing is that from inside your car, you drive to the ExxonMobil station, you kind of verify that the GPS has you at the right ExxonMobil, and then you tell them what pump you're on, and then it kind of unlocks the pump and authorizes the transaction, all from inside your car. You don't even have to get out to pay for it. You can do it from inside, which is really convenient. And it, of course, benefits the company because they're able to gather more information about you as a consumer if you're part of their rewards program, rather than simply using a contactless payment form at the pump. And of course, these apps, that the energy companies have are not using NFC. They're just using normal wireless phone data. So the final example that I have is about mass transit. So specifically the CTA system in Chicago. In the world of the CTA, many people use their little Ventra card to pay for their fares. And the card is, of course, attached to your Ventra account, and that allows you to pay contactlessly at the turnstile on the L or inside a CTA bus. I guess this was my first NFC card, maybe, was a Ventra card. But did you know that you can actually use your NFC credit card to pay for a CTA trip? You don't have to have the Ventra card. You can just use your credit card if it has the contactless payment little symbol on it. I didn't know this until recently. You simply tap your credit card onto the payment pad at the turnstile, and it'll let you in and deduct the proper fare. You can even use your mobile wallet like Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Samsung Pay at the turnstile. So this allows me, for example, to pay by holding my Apple Watch on the turnstile payment pad. I don't love the idea of Ventra having a balance of mine that's kind of hanging out on my account. So this way of paying contactlessly seems to be preferable. To be fair, I haven't actually tried this because I haven't used mass transportation since COVID kicked off, but I plan to do so in the future. So this really concludes my prepared remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. It looks like there's some chats that have come in. Okay, the first question is, when using Apple Pay, do you get a hard copy receipt? Yes. If I use Apple Pay at Walgreens, I still get a receipt like normal. But then I also noticed that Apple sends me a message when the payment goes through saying you just paid $12.35 at Walgreens, just to kind of, it's like an anti-fraud kind of thing. And I find that comforting too. What about Apple Pay? Some people use Apple Pay actually to send money to people they know. So this is kind of, Howell asked, what is Apple Cash? So I think this is the same idea. Apple Pay does have this component where you can send payment from peer to peer. So I could send my sister some money with her iPhone and my iPhone. You just have to set it up in your Apple Wallet to allow Apple Cash to be a possibility. And it's very similar to the idea of Cash App or Venmo, in that you're making that peer-to-peer payment. I didn't include it because I think probably the most popular form of doing this is these specific apps. But you're definitely correct that you can use Apple Pay to send peer-to-peer payments, and that may be true for Google Pay or Samsung Pay as well. I don't know that it's unique to Apple, but they do make it pretty easy. Any other questions? And you can unmute yourself and ask them that way if you prefer. Well, if there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for spending a few minutes with me tonight to learn about contactless payments.
I do have a question. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So you mentioned briefly before about the fact that the credit card, you have some protections with using a credit card versus a debit card.
Yes.
With the mobile payments, kind of in the same situation again then, right? You're losing the protections of the credit card.
Yes, those mobile payment apps like Zelle and Venmo and Cash App and that sort of thing, you don't have that same level of protection that you do with a contactless credit card. But if you use a credit card that is contactless or not through a mobile wallet, you still have that protection. If you use Apple Pay to pay at the store, you still get protected through your credit card. Nothing changes there. But yeah, those peer-to-peer payments are not protected.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Any others? Well, if you think of anything else, feel free to send me an email or stop by the library and chat with me. I'm a big fan of contactless payment due to the convenience, and it seems secure enough for me, but everybody has a different tolerance level for risk. So I would perfectly understand if some of you weren't comfortable with the idea. So thanks again for coming, and I will see you all at the library, hopefully. Take care.
Very much. It was very informative.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.